As expected, the Federal Reserve has left rates unchanged.
The FOMC decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged and to continue to reduce our securities holdings.
So I thought I'd make this quick video breaking down some of the things that Jay Powell mentioned that I thought stood out from today's FOMC meeting. So coming right out of the gate, I'm sure you guys have noticed that some analysts were projecting that the Federal Reserve wouldn't cut rates at all in 2024. And today, although they held rates steady, they are still projecting 3 rate cuts in the year 2024. So those will be 25 basis point cuts, bringing the Fed funds rate or the effective rate down to 4.6. And he also said this.
But inflation is still too high. Ongoing progress in bringing it down is not assured, and the path forward is uncertain.
Basically stating that while he acknowledges the fact that inflation has come down, and we've been seeing that disinflation at the Fed somewhat wanted to see over the past 15 months, but he's not entirely sure on the current path or trajectory of inflation at this moment. And so that goes back to the whole data dependency, right? So he doesn't want to run the risk of cutting rates too early and then it basically just brings inflation back. But on the flip side, if he waits too long, you can start to create stresses in the labor market. And we've already seen some, although gradual, we've been seeing some softening in the labor market or weakness. Now on unemployment, he also mentioned that if there was some significant spike in the unemployment rate, that would be a reason for the Federal Reserve to actually start raising rates again, which goes back to what I just said with those 2 risks. So you risk cutting too soon, reigniting inflation, or waiting too late to cut, which could cause stress in the labor market. Now, I thought this next point was extremely important because he assured us that rates will not go back to pre-pandemic levels.
My instinct would be that rates will not go back down to the very low levels that we saw where all around the world there were long-run rates that were at or below zero in some cases. I don't see rates going back down to that level, but I think there's tremendous uncertainty around that.
So I've been hearing people over the past couple of years saying that we're going to get back to easy money policies, ZIRP, zero interest rate policy. But guys, I made a video about this probably 6 months ago. We're not going back to ZIRP. That's how we got here anyway. Matter of fact, I'm gonna link that video into the description because it's still extremely relevant. You should go check it out. It basically breaks down from 2008 how we got here because of zero interest rate policy or easy money policies, which is interest rates being at the zero bound or very, very low. Because the last thing the Federal Reserve would wanna do is put us back in the same position. Another thing is that there's no indication that we're gonna slow down on QT either. And so, and I brought this up on one of our macro calls on the Know It House channel, but they're gonna continue to keep rolling those MBSs or mortgage-backed securities off of their balance sheet as well as treasuries. Although the pace at which they've been offloading those mortgage-backed securities has been slower. They're going to continue doing that until it's completely gone or for the most part gone. And ideally for the Fed, they would love to have a balance sheet or like to have a balance sheet that's made up of mostly treasuries. He said that as well. Now, going back to those 2 risks, if we had to choose one risk to live with, I would assume it would have to be the inflation risk, i.e. cutting rates too soon and reigniting inflation. I think they would take that risk over a huge spike in unemployment because we've kept interest rates at a restrictive level. And one thing I'm going to be watching to pretty much always know where we are in terms of if we're going into a recessionary period because of interest rate policy is the Sahm Rule. The Sahm Rule was created by Claudia Sahm. She used to work inside of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve now uses this indicator as well. Long story short, she basically came up with the Sahm Rule because she had to figure out when the appropriate time was to start sending out stimulus packages in the event that we had a recession and the consumer became heavily affected. One of the questions that was posed to her on the back of determining that stimulus checks were the best method to kind of buffer against those downside risks in a recessionary period, how do we know we're in a recession? So Claudia Sahm created this indicator, and it's important. I keep saying indicator, not forecaster. It doesn't tell you that a recession is going to happen a year from now or last year. It tells you in real time pretty much that you're in the first innings of the recession when it triggers. Now, what the Sahm Rule states is if the 3-month average of the unemployment rate jumps 50 basis points above the previous 12-year low, that indicates that we're in the first innings of a recession. So I'm going to keep watching this to let us know where we are at all times. But right now, we're still quite a ways away from hitting that 0.5 number. The latest print in February was 0.27, as you can see here. Now, I do think we're gonna get that first rate cut most likely in July, start of Q3. But let's say the Federal Reserve decides to push it out further past July. Well, that's only going to push us closer to triggering that Sahm rule, because the unemployment rate will continue to rise. And they're projecting 4% on the unemployment rate next year, but they risk that number being higher if they decide to pass on cutting rates in July. So I gotta assume that they're gonna cut rates. As I said before, I think they would rather risk inflation reigniting versus having a huge spike in that unemployment number. So here's a fact too. There's never been a recession with the unemployment rate under 5.4%, but the rate at which the unemployment rate rises because of restrictive monetary policy could push us into a recession, even if we're still under 5.4%. So I do think they're gonna give us that first rate cut in July. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoy this type of content. If you got value from it, subscribe, leave a comment, tell your friends. Even if it's a bad comment and you're kind of talking some shit at me, feel free. Go subscribe to our Know It Alls channel where we talk about all types of financial concepts and economic concepts. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't. Feel free to book a free strategy session down below, link in bio. And guys, I'll see you on the next one.